Welcome back to another episode of From the Couch Sports. I'm your host, Connor, and if you enjoy the content, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. I've got a few things I want to get into today. We are at a kind of slower time in sports, so the frequency of the videos isn't going to be quite as much as it will be, mid-football, mid-basketball season and whatnot. But I do want to get into a few different things. To start things off, Kyler Murray just signed a massive contract extension this week. He signed a $230.5 million deal, which turns out to be just over $46 million per year. It's $46.1 annual per season, and $160 million of that is guaranteed. So it's funny because I remember Kyler Murray coming out, and it was, should this guy stay and playing football after just winning the Heisman, or should he go and play baseball, being a first-round pick in the MLB? And, media and everything was just completely covering it. And at the time, it was you'd look at the numbers, and it's like, the top baseball players, I think at the time were signing, bigger deals. You'll get a baseball player sign a 10-year contract and things like that, which really isn't frequent in the NFL. So at the time, it was really a big talking point in the media as to whether or not he should play baseball or play football. And Kyler ended up playing football, going first overall to the Arizona Cardinals. And, he certainly has had like a rocky, I wouldn't even really say a rocky start. He's been a very good quarterback throughout his, 4-year career so far. It hasn't been perfect. There's certainly been some, negative things that have happened. The way Arizona went out last year, a lot of people are criticizing. But overall, Kyler Murray has been a very good quarterback. Now, I believe this is the highest paid QB in football on an annual salary. Because I want to say Deshaun signed a $46 million deal. So Kyler got just 0.1 more basically per season. The one thing that was kind of strange, though, Kyler didn't get this fully guaranteed, where Deshaun Watson did. He got a fully guaranteed contract with all the other things going on. So that was a little bit confusing. But outside of that, Kyler Murray's staying with the Cardinals. He's locked up for the foreseeable future. And, they've got a good quarterback. They took him number 1 overall for a reason, and he really has shown a lot in these first few seasons. And then, with Kyler signing, it brings a question up to me, when is Lamar Jackson going to get re-signed? He's actually entering his 5th year, I believe, because he's on the 5th-year option. And then I think they could franchise tag him even after that. I think they should just do the long-term extension. The only thing, though, for Lamar Jackson is, he's more proven than both of these guys in Deshaun and Kyler as far as, he's been to the playoffs, I think, pretty much every year of his career, outside of, I think, last year, and he was hurt most of the year. And, MVP season and everything, I think there's reason to believe that he could call for more than what these two guys were getting, and I believe he kind of has his own agent, which is his mother. Him and his mom kind of negotiate the contracts and stuff. So I'm curious how that plays out differently than having an actual agent. But up to this point, it's worked pretty good so far. So I want to see that deal go down. Lamar Jackson is one of the craziest, most entertaining NFL players of, our lifetime. It really is. I was fortunate enough to watch Michael Vick play, and in some ways he's another level of that, at least as a runner when it comes to playing the football. He's without a doubt the best running quarterback of all time. I guess you can make the argument for Mike Vick, but I feel like with each passing year, Lamar just kind of sets that, the new standard for it. And he's also kind of a different type of runner than what we saw in Michael Vick. But, with Kyler getting extended, and Kyler did kind of a lot of, he didn't hold out, but they had the whole offseason drama, his agent releasing the letter basically saying that he wants to be extended, wants to be one of the top paid guys and whatnot. So I, I don't think Lamar showed up to like the voluntary stuff throughout the offseason. And he very well could be holding out, but I mean, if you're the Ravens, I feel like you got to extend him right away. He's your team runs around Lamar Jackson. Like last year, they got a few good games out of their backup quarterbacks when Lamar was out, but they didn't go near as far as they would. I think with Lamar on that team, they're in the playoffs every year, and he hasn't had a ton of playoff success as far as wins go. But I certainly think that he could potentially in the future. But moving on, a couple NBA things. This offseason has been strange because we're kind of all holding out on Kevin Durant being traded. The news that Kevin Durant was demanding a trade came out. It seems like there hasn't been too many big free agency moves. We did see DeAndre Ayton, sign an offer sheet with the Pacers and then have that matched by the Suns. So he's returning to the Suns for, 6 months to a year at the minimum. But like really, Kevin Durant he's one of the best players in basketball at the moment. He demanded the trade this offseason, but what it feels like has happened is the Nets are just wanting so much for a player that, he's 34 years old. They're wanting, from the reports, 5-6 first-round picks, all-star caliber players, as well as, other assets with potential and whatnot. So, are they going to be able to get that for Kevin Durant? I think it's certainly possible, but for a team to make all that work, both financially and still be able to, be happy about their roster, thinking that they can compete for a championship. Because obviously, if you're going to bring in Kevin Durant, I think he's 33, 34 years old. You're not bringing him in for a 10-year span or anything. You're bringing him in for 4 or 5 years, and you're going to try to compete and win championships during that period of time because he is one of the best players in basketball. But if you have to give up your entire team to acquire Kevin Durant, then it's kind of, it's not an ideal situation. And like pretty much every team in the NBA, it seems like, would be interested in Kevin Durant. And one thing like I think is very possible to happen is he just comes back to the Nets next year. They have him under contract. He's already good friends with Kyrie, who's also coming back next year under contract. I mean, unless they trade him somehow. And, then you have Ben Simmons. And Ben Simmons did not play last year. And we all know that he's not a perfect basketball player. But I think that, him sitting out a year, people completely forget that when he's on the court, he's one of the best passers in the game. And he is an elite defender. He's going to be one of the best defenders in basketball when he's playing on this roster. And the flexibility that he gives them, being able to run the point and everything. We did not get an opportunity to see that last year. And honestly, that could be the difference between the Nets getting swept in the first round versus them going deep into the playoffs, potentially winning it all. And then also, Kyrie playing more of the season and everything now that things have seemed to change. So I'm curious to see how the dominoes fall. It's been a funny time as far as NBA, Twitter, news, media, and everything goes, because these accounts just completely I don't know if it's fabrication, but they are just constantly saying these nonsense stories. It's literally every single day there is a new story about the Miami Heat, that they're going all in for Donovan Mitchell, or they're pushing all their chips to the table for Kevin Durant. They're doing this and that, and it's just like nothing has happened yet. I think every team in basketball is in a similar position if they can acquire Kevin Durant. And then just the other day we had this whole there was a Utah news outlet that basically said on air that Donovan Mitchell, the trade had been finalized. They're just working out a couple minor details, and it would be announced soon. And here we are a couple days later, and I mean, there's certainly a possibility that he gets traded before I post this video. But as of now, on Saturday, he has not been traded yet. And I don't know how quickly that's coming, if it even is coming at all. I do see, like, if you're the Jazz, you got rid of Rudy Gobert. Maybe you get rid of Mitchell and just try to do a full on rebuild. There's a lot of upcoming prospects that would be worth tanking for, most likely. So I guess we'll see how that plays out too. And then one thing I did want to talk about also in regards to the NBA, James Harden ended up signing an extension. Well, I guess re-signing with the 76ers. And this is a kind of a big thing that I don't see a whole lot in basketball. Um, and I guess this could just be a recency thing, but I don't fully feel like I've seen this happen since like the big three in Miami, where a player willingly takes a big pay cut in order to give the team more financial flexibility and build a championship roster around him. So this is what James Harden's done, and as much as I've critiqued him in the past, and as far as like his playoff performances and things like that, this is a big move, and you got to give the dude credit for wanting to win. And for, like, frankly, that money, they've already brought in PJ Tucker. We know what PJ Tucker brings in. He's going to give you a great corner 3-point shooter. He's going to give you a ton of energy on defense, a good rebounder, and he's one of those like veteran coach type players that you want in your locker room. And like he's literally been, he was a part of Milwaukee a couple years ago, part of Miami this last year. Like, he is a key piece on teams that go deep into the playoffs. So the 76ers adding him partially because James Harden like freed up that cap space, that's major. And then if you look at the 76ers on paper, they already have one of the best rosters in basketball. So them adding these extra pieces and James Harden coming back, getting a full year in the Sixers system, I think next year they could be a very dangerous team. And then, I mean, Joel Embiid is just going to a new level. A lot of people argued he should have won MVP this season. He's really is one of the best centers in basketball. So I'm curious to see how this team, progresses next year. And all props to James Harden for doing that. And then moving on from the NBA, I do want to talk about the UFC. There has been some pretty big announcements as far as future fights that are coming up. And then we just wrapped up the second UFC London card of this year. And to start things off, like, the first card, I think this is March or April. That was one of the best fight cards of the entire year. It just was fireworks from start to finish. I will say this second fight card, not as awesome, but there certainly was their fair share of awesome fights on this card. It wasn't. It's funny, and this happens a lot of times with rematches in fights. You rematch or you rebook a venue, and you hope to have the same kind of magic that you did the first time. And this is, fighting in reality is something that you can't really predict, what's going to happen. There's certain things that just they happen sometimes in MMA. If every once in a while you're going to get a boring fight, you're going to have a card full of decisions, just as well as you're going to have a card full of knockouts and submissions. And then, you'll get those fluke injuries. And the thing that's terrible is we have seen two of those in back-to-back weeks in UFC main events and fights that were, leading up to be incredible fights. And it's just tough to see, but it's part of the sport. And for every Saturday that we're super excited and seeing knockout after knockout, we got to live with the fact that it's not going to always be like that. These when you lock two men in cages, two men and women in cages, really anything can happen, and that's what we've seen these last couple weeks. But, getting into the fights on the card, there certainly were some good ones to talk about. An interesting prospect that, I think at this point he's getting a ton of hype. It's Muhammad Makaev. This is a guy who had a crazy amateur career. He's undefeated. He's like I think he's He fights out of the UK, but incredible grappler, and he actually has very good striking as well. And he was facing an opponent that not as many people may have known, but Charles Johnson is a very good fighter in his own right, and Muhammad Makaev just dominated this fight from start to finish, just constantly grappling with him. And he was searching for submissions as well, so I wouldn't really call it a boring fight or anything. He's trying to get the finish. Charles just had very good submission defense. Um, but moving on to the main card. So when you look at a fight card overall, you can get a main card that's just banger after banger, and then you could get a prelims that's could be the opposite. Sometimes the prelims are awesome and the main card, isn't. In this particular instance, 7 of the 8 prelims were decisions, and then the main card was kind of the opposite. Most of them were finishes. But getting into the first main card event, this is Volkan Ozdemir versus Paul Craig, and this was a decision win for Volkan Ozdemir. Now, Paul Craig just constantly pushing forward, trying to get submissions. In this fight, he wasn't able to pull one off. There was a couple moments where he seemed to be in decent positions, but Volkan Ozdemir had very good defense, and then whenever he was getting in offensive exchanges, he was winning them. So he was able to take that one by decision. And then the next fight, and this is when just things started popping crazy with the British crowd and everything. Molly McCann, who's from over there as well, she fought Hannah Goldie, and the finish that she had was just crazy. And it's crazy to think because the spinning back elbow it doesn't seem like it happens all too often, but Molly McCann has used it in 2 straight fights. And the first fight she put her opponent's lights out completely, and in this fight it basically led to the finish. She dropped her opponent, and then finished her off with some big hands. Seeing the celebration, the crowd, the home crowd, and everything, that is awesome to see in MMA. And then afterwards, she's sitting ringside, cheering on her teammates and country men and women and whatnot. Country men, because there was only men's fights after that. But then the next fight, Nikita Krylov versus Alexander Gustafsson. This is Gus's return fight. His last fight, I think, was in 2019 or 2020. This was he moved up to heavyweight, fought Fabricio Verdum, and got submitted. And then he came back down to 205 for this fight. And this is the thing that's tough about MMA that we've talked about a lot on this channel. In this fight, Nikita Krylov right off the bat landed a big right, dropped Gus, and then he was kind of scrambling, able to get back on his feet, avoid some damage. And then they were in the clinch, and Krylov landed another big bomb that led to the finish. I want to say this is like a minute 30 into the fight. But great win for Nikita Krylov. As a fan of Alexander Gustafsson, and seeing his career for so long, it's tough. It's one of those things that we talk about. Seems like every time one of these veterans goes down in a tough way, it's just the fact that MMA is the most brutal sport there is. You don't go in basketball and you don't once you get out of your prime, you don't start getting knocked out unconscious. And in other sports, it's you lose a little bit of athleticism and then you kind of start falling out of the lineup. You don't get as much playing time. If you're a running back, you start splitting carries and then eventually just get kind of phased out. If you're in basketball, depending on the player, they usually become more of a rotational guy coming off the bench. Some players, they can't live with that. But they're tough things in really any sport. So I'm not trying to downplay a career falling. If you are looking at other sports, the thing is it's more of a brutality thing. If you're fighting professional boxing or MMA, and you've had a long career, these organizations that they'll throw you in with a young guy. I know Nikita Krylov is he's a veteran as well, but it's a brutal sport, and this can happen when you're coming up in your prime, when you're 25 years old. Seeing it happen to a guy that we've really enjoyed watching for a decade, and having these long careers, I think that's what's harder to see. And in fighting, we don't get to see them fight 82 games a year or 17 games a year. It's you see this guy 2, maybe 3 times a year at the most. And then with the brutality of the sport, there's tons of years where these guys are hurt and they're just rehabbing for a year. He had the COVID year where a lot of people missed, and so seeing these kind of things, I think it's a little more brutal. But this certainly was a tough fight to watch. And then moving past it, Paddy Pimblett is another just got the crowd crazy going. He fought Jordan Levitt, and it was a funny kind of banter back and forth. This was it didn't feel like a super serious beef. Like, they'd go into their interviews and Paddy came out like sounding like he was super pissed off, talking about how he's going to take his head and everything like that, and how he wanted to teabag him like Modern Warfare 2. And then on the flip side, Jordan Levitt was, saying he was going to twerk over him after he finished him, and just kind of playful banter back and forth. You had the final face-off where Paddy faked the handshake and, wiped back. And it just, I thought it was entertaining. I didn't think it was too serious. I know a lot of people seem to pick up with it like, oh, this is Paddy Pimblett being super serious and pissed off and everything, when it seemed in good fun. But, the fight was pretty fun as well. Jordan Levitt immediately, being on the feet with Paddy Pimblett, he's pretty good stand-up. He put Jordan in a position to just grapple right off the bat. And even in the first round, Paddy did, put him in submission attempts and did pretty good in the grappling exchanges. And then in the second round, he was able to just land I've only seen this like once and in the replay, but it looks like he landed a big knee, and then he was able to kind of take his back and, forgive my lack of knowledge, for the exact terms and everything, but he had him in like a rear naked choke, but one of his arms was stuck, so he wasn't able to block his hand. So that was, able to lead to Paddy winning the fight by submission, getting a huge win. And then he did try to teabag him afterwards, which was funny. And then, they seemed to play it off in good fun, though, because even afterwards, Jordan Levitt seemed to be joking with him and whatnot. And Paddy Pimblett at this point is a superstar in the UFC. Now, we can talk whether or not he's going to be a championship caliber fighter or not. But I feel like a lot of times that's everything that people want to talk about is, oh, well, he's not going to win a belt, so he can't beat Charles or these top 5 guys. They say it about other, up-and-coming prospects. And whether or not that's true, I don't think it really matters, to be honest, because the UFC has proven time and time again, you don't necessarily need to be the champion to have a big following and, have a lot of fans. Like, Jorge Masvidal is one of the biggest, fighters. Never won a championship belt. Nate Diaz never won a belt. Like, these are guys that, they've had their losses, but they're just so fun to watch that people don't care. And I think that Paddy falls into that as well. And then, moving past the co-main event, this was supposed to be Jack Hermansson versus Darren Till. Darren Till got injured and had to pull out. So Chris Curtis came in, fought on short notice, and it was a 3-round decision win for Jack Hermansson. Chris Curtis got like really pissed off at the end of the fight. What seemed like was happening in this fight is Hermansson wasn't able to take Curtis down, so he just kept his distance, and instead of just trying to get in the pocket and boxing with him. The guy's clearly a great boxer. Hermansson just kind of stayed on the outside, used his jab, leg kicks, and things like that, and just had a crazy output. I want to say he threw over 100 strikes more landed. And that led to him winning by decision. And Curtis was mad, saying that like he felt like the guy was running. And I understand there's certainly multiple perspectives to everything, but in this I didn't really feel like Hermanson was running. Like if you're a fighter, your strengths and weaknesses. You're not gonna just actively get in the pocket with someone who's clearly has better boxing than you. If you're not able to use your grappling that you'd think is better than his, then like how are you gonna win outside of doing what he did, using his length and reach and everything? So that's what you got to do. Do what it takes to win, rather than putting yourself at risk to getting knocked out. Obviously, your opponent wants that. The fans want that. But at the end of the day, these guys are, they're getting paid to win, and they're you risk getting brain damage, you're not getting paid as much, and it's not as good on your career in the long run. And then the main event, this is tough to see these injuries in big fights. Last week we had Brian Ortega, his shoulder getting dislocated. This week, Tom Aspinall, in the span of like 15 seconds, he throws a leg kick, steps back on his leg, and just completely blows out his knee. And he literally couldn't move at all. So it had to have been a super serious injury. We've seen even serious knee injuries in MMA where guys can keep fighting. Thiago Santos, I think, tore a lot of his knee in the John Jones fight. Josh Emmett, I want to say he tore his ACL or something. Like there's been plenty of fighters go on torn ACLs and stuff. So this is a pretty serious injury for the guy, like not even able to be able to stand or anything. And just terrible, because like the first 15 minutes they got in there and it looked like this was about to be an awesome fight. Two giant heavyweights, both some of the best fighters in the entire world. Are we going to get to see Tom Aspinall elevate his career, put himself into that next, title contender area? Or are we going to see Curtis Blaydes kind of solidify himself at the top of the division and, also kind of push for that title fight next? And unfortunately, we didn't get to see either of those. And, this type of thing you just hate. You hate for the athletes. I mean, for Curtis Blaydes, this is a guy who trained for however long, 8-10 weeks, something like that. Flew all the way across the world to fight this guy and, make a name for himself and earn a living. And, for Tom Aspinall too, you put all this time in and then 15 seconds in, you're going to get a loss for a fluke injury. It's tough to see. But, like I talked about earlier, it's part of the fight game. This type of thing happens. I hope it doesn't happen too much. It's terrible seeing this happen 2 weeks in a row to really fun fighters. Guys that, very well could have won both of their fights had the injuries not happened. And then, moving past this event, I want to talk on some future UFC cards that were or future fights that were just booked to this week. So first of all, Islam Makhachev versus Charles Oliveira. This is going to happen in Abu Dhabi, and I believe this is October. I could be wrong on that. But this is going to be awesome style matchup. Like, honestly, I feel like this is kind of Khabib Tony. And I'm not exactly, but you've got Islam, who is an insane grappler. Charles, who's amazing, arguably the best jiu-jitsu in MMA. And they're clashing. And this is for the belt. Although most people, kind of see Charles as the champ because he missed weight by 0.5 pounds and then he still won his fight. So most people still see him and consider him the champ. But the one thing that I didn't really understand, so apparently they're coming back to Brazil next year. I really felt like Charles should have been fighting in Brazil. Like the guy, he beat Michael Chandler for the belt. Then he defended his belts against Poirier and Gaethje in America both times. I want to say the Poirier fight was like in Texas or Florida, and then the Gaethje fight was in Arizona. So it was like he fought both times on U.S. soil instead of fighting like on his home ground, and he's like literally the champion. And now he's going where it's not exactly Islam's home necessarily, but like Abu Dhabi, like big time fans of Habib and Islam, like that. Khabib was getting paid crazy money to fight over there and everything, so it kind of feels like an Islam home fight. But also it's like I don't think I certainly believe the crowd has a part to do in it, but I don't think they're gonna have a crazy amount of fans like necessarily because it's on the island. I think still, but still that's gonna be an awesome matchup. Curious to see how that plays out. We're probably gonna get to see either Charles winning on this with the stand up because in my opinion he's a better striker, or we're gonna get to see the clash of different grappling styles and see whose style is more dominant. And then two other things I want to talk on. So this was kind of crazy. Sean O'Malley is booked to fight Petr Yan, and what's crazy is Sean O'Malley is coming off of a no contest where an eye poke stopped the fight. And I know you can go back and forth as to, should he have stopped the fight over this and whatnot. But regardless, it was a no contest. That was the first guy that O'Malley was fighting even in the top 10. And he's going from that fight to probably a number one contender matchup with the guy who just held the belt. He was originally the bantamweight champion. He lost his belt due to the illegal strike on Aljo, and then he won the interim belt and then lost to Aljo in the rematch. But O'Malley, this is going to be a super fun fight. I mean, we're really going to get to see, one, the style matchup. Their different styles of striking, I think, is going to make for a very fun fight. Petr Yan is a very good boxer. And then, Sean O'Malley just has very unique style. He's got the range, the distance, and everything. So I really want to see this fight. I mean, if I had to, make a prediction, I feel like Petr Yan should be the heavy favorite. But this is the type of thing that gives Sean O'Malley, like, I mean, if he wins that fight, he's already a huge name in MMA. Winning that fight makes him a superstar. Winning that fight puts him in the, next in line to fight for the belt. Like, that's big time. And going from a no contest win, no contest, not a win, a no contest fight over Pedro Munoz to jumping into fighting the former champ, pretty crazy. But I'm sure this one's gonna sell, and it's gonna be a fun fight regardless of who wins. And then the final one. So Nate Diaz and the UFC have had, I mean, it's just constantly been a back and forth relationship. Nate Diaz seems to, not want to be with the UFC anymore. The UFC has just constantly been, I remember last year, Nate was calling to fight Dustin in like December or January. And that was like I thought that was going to be a very fun fight that they should have booked. But come to find out that Nate only had one fight left on his deal. The UFC has tried to re-sign him multiple times, but he hasn't wanted to. He just wants to leave the UFC. He wants to be done with his career with them. And, this is kind of a sign of, like, a very good reason why. Because he's trying to fight Dustin, which is a super good matchup. Dustin was the number one contender at lightweight. And, they've had previous history. They had that fight booked in the past, and it never came to fruition. So that fight made perfect sense. From what a lot of people said, the UFC also wanted to do Nate Diaz versus Conor McGregor 3, which of course you want to do that. They're 1-1. They haven't fought in 6 years. The trilogy kind of ties things up. But, with Nate Diaz not wanting to resign, they say instead you can fight Khamzat Chimaev. a guy who just, beat the number 2 ranked fighter in the world at welterweight, that you could even argue should be fighting for the belt right now. I mean, Leon Edwards is fighting for the belt off of a win over Nate Diaz. So now they're like, Khamzat's for sure going to do the same thing if he wins, and he's going to be a massive betting favorite. It's not a great style matchup for Nate, but also Nate he's one of those, he's a true fighter. He's going to fight regardless of who his opponent is, and he believes he can win on any given day. And there's been times where he's been counted out before. I'm pretty sure he was counted out against McGregor in the first fight. Ended up choking him out. So, would that be a huge surprise? It certainly would. But when it's a fight, anything is possible. I mean, Nate wobbled Leon Edwards, so could he land a big shot on Khamzat, who, got clipped by Gilbert Burns? That's certainly possible. But we'll talk about that one a little bit more as it gets closer. It is going to be a pay-per-view headliner, so this is really what the UFC tries to do. If you become an old aging fighter, you've been in the UFC for a long time, they are going to keep feeding you to these young guns, these killers, and you're going to be put on their highlight reel. And with Khamzat, he already has, he's a mythical fighter at this point. Like, he had the 2 fights in 10 days, I think it was, or something like that. Back-to-back finishes. Then he finished Gerald Meerschaert in the first 15 seconds with the first punch. Then the way that he finished Yi. And then just absolute war with Gilbert Burns, which I think was a co-main event. So now you're going from that to a 5-round main event against Nate Diaz, who is one of the biggest names in MMA. If he gets a big win there, he is, at least talking about the new guys, he's the biggest name in the UFC, probably outside of McGregor, Izzy, and whatnot. Khamzat for sure, and the pulling power he's going to be able to do in Abu Dhabi and things like Khabib and Islam have done, it's going to be crazy. So on one hand, I understand the UFC's perspective of it. I also think it's kind of shitty for Nate Diaz. It's like this guy's been in your organization for 15 years. And, you're just trying to feed him to a guy to basically put him on someone's highlight reel to promote their next fight being a title fight. But that's just my take on everything we discussed today. Let me know what you thought. What are your thoughts on the NFL? The contracts that we discussed, the NBA offseason, and then the UFC fights coming up, but also UFC London. Give me some feedback, and as always, thanks for tuning in.